Okay, for those of you just tuning in, we had a short delay. The UN reporter hadn't shown up yet, but here he is. So, I guess we'll be starting here shortly. This is Freeman Sullivan, your intrepid live streamer, broadcasting here from St. Anthony's Foundation at 150 Golden Gate here in San Francisco. And
hello, folks. Just want to say maybe start settling down. Again, there are coffee on the side and pastries, but we'll be starting pretty soon. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. You gonna record the whole thing?
Live stream it.
Oh, you're live streaming. All right.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of people from our organization that weren't able to make it today. So.
What organization is that?
First, they came for the homeless.
Ah, I spoke on that tour.
War tour?
Yeah, we came to San Francisco, and then we went to, hold on 1 second. Sorry. I gotta look for the other one. Anyway, shiny things cut like an ostrich. I gotta look for somebody who's wearing the other half. Anyway, so then we went to, I think it was Merced, and then Los Angeles. You know Sandy Perry?
No.
Mike Rhodes?
Yeah, I know Mike Rhodes.
Yeah, Mike Rhodes is on that too, a portion of it. Anyway.
So we're the only ones that seem like we're winning. I mean, all the other stuff that I see that's going on.
Well, depends how you describe winning.
Well, we have a case in federal court right now that I filed because they were trying to boot us out of the BART thing, right? Well, they finally got us out of there. But what happened was our group split up, and now instead of having 3 encampments, we have we have 3, and now they've all filled out, and we have the city of Berkeley they can't do any, they can't try to take any legal action because we've got them tied up in court, and we've got it in a favorable position. We've got a favorable judge who actually wants to see what the city of Berkeley has actually done, which is nothing other than their little program that they think that they're doing. And so we got them to where they're not moving in on anybody. Right? That's Berkeley.
All right.
So Berkeley's
for the,
a little more liberal in most places.
In Fresno, they're putting together a class action suit against Caltrans for taking people's belongings from them.
Oh yeah.
And there was already a lawsuit that was won in Fresno against the city for doing the very same thing. So the ACLU is doing that lawsuit. Hey! Wow, man!
Hey, bro. How you doing?
All right. How's life treating you?
Like everybody else.
Not everybody's the same.
Yeah, for those of you just joining us here, we're getting ready to start the program. Hopefully this will be coming in clear. I can see that by a viewer. Let me know what's up on the chat. I'd appreciate it because I'm not really happy with this Ustream live streamer, but I settled on it for today because I'm not happy with YouTube live stream either. So, and I'm thinking about just writing my own, just using my own software here in the future because all this new software sucks. If you really want to know the truth. So, anyway, let me know what it looks like on chat. Yeah, hey, what's up there?
Was that SOS? Yeah.
So,
Okay.
also, if you happen to check, could you
looking forward to hearing
let other people know that we're up?
I've been putting together the information to be able to.
UN reporter. UN reporter. No, it's not going to let me do that.
All right, so that's set up. Kelly has the card.
Does that work? Well,
I know, right? That's what I was wondering.
We'll see what happens here. Anyway, if you see anything, let me know. I very much appreciate it. And we'll be starting here in just a few seconds.
Hello, hello, hello. Good morning. Sorry, I have a pretty good coffee today. So we'll start now, and I want to introduce Barry Stenger. He's the Executive Director of St. Anthony Foundation.
I just wanted to word and welcome all of you to St. Anthony's, but the most important thing is to tell you that there's free Wi-Fi. So if you go on your device, it's there. St. Anthony's free Wi-Fi. People don't even know that. But it's really great to be here and welcome all of you to St. Anthony's. It seems maybe strange in some ways for all of us who are kind of really connected to our local communities and working in really local kinds of things to be welcoming somebody from an international organization like the UN.
Yeah.
Welcome to Halston, St. Anthony's, and to this group. But it's not strange in another way, for me anyway. The UN was founded like a stone's throw from here, just over here a couple of blocks away. So it's quite fitting that the UN come back here to Golden Gate and Jones and be part of what we're doing here and listening to what the folks here have to say. And it's also quite fitting, I think, for you to come back to St. Anthony's or come to St. Anthony's, because I know the UN was founded on the principle that all persons are created with that inherent human dignity that we ought to respect, and that's the foundation of any human rights language that we use. And I know here at St. Anthony's that's very important to us, that we respect the inherent dignity of the people we serve and that we work with. I hear people coming here to the Tenderloin wanting to fix people here, and I have to remind them that we're not here to fix people. We're here to respect their journey, to accompany them on their journey because of that inherent dignity that we all share. So we're here to encourage you to help the UN understand folks struggling for that, struggling to find someone who will respect that dignity, which is the basis of their human rights. So with that said, welcome, and welcome, Rapporteur.
Thank you very much, Barry, St. Anthony, for hosting the this UN, for allowing the Western Regional Advocacy Project to host, and together with other organizations, to host this UN Rapporteur for Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. Just to give a little background about Western Regional Advocacy Project. Western Regional Advocacy Project was founded in 2005 to pretty much to address the root causes of poverty and homelessness, and to eliminate. The goal is to eliminate homelessness. And this forum is also hosted by Coalition on Homelessness in San Francisco, St. Anthony, St. Mary's Center, and other also organizations that also actually going to be part of the panel today. So just to give a little, for this building, there is a restroom when you go out on the left side, and also for the panelists, I just want to give you have a timekeeper just to give you, and Kelly will be at the back, so she'll give you guys like a warning in a way. So just to give hopefully everyone has the program. So we will have the group presentations with different topics on it, and also at the end there will be an open mic just in case for other people that would like to address something to the UN Rapporteur. So today we have the UN Rapporteur, Philip Alston, and maybe you can introduce yourself and say something about the UN Special Rapporteur for Poverty and Human Rights.
Well, many thanks. It's a great pleasure to be here. This is a return home at one level. Sitting in the back is a lady named Julianne Trailer, who actually was the first person to ever teach me a human rights class in Berkeley. Julianne's very young, but that was 41 years ago. Just to say a few very quick words, the role of, Barry said it as well as I could have, in a sense, the notion on which the UN is founded in the human rights area is that all countries have to be accountable beyond their own borders, as it were. And the United States, and my country, Australia, has always been very keen to hold other countries to account. You're not doing it right, you've got to do more of this, etc. But we're a little less enthusiastic when it comes to be our turn. My role here is to look at the extent to which the civil rights, as we call it in the US, of people who are forced to live in poverty are being respected or undermined. I'm going to a number of places across the country, but the issue of homelessness in both LA and San Francisco is very high on the agenda. The starting point for my work generally is that poverty is a choice. The conservatives would say that it's your choice, you've chosen it, live with it. I say that it's a political choice. It's a choice that's been made by our politicians. They can put their money in one place or in another in order to provide the minimum social protection that everyone is entitled to under human rights law. But our politicians have generally decided not to do that. And so it's extremely important for me to try to emphasize, to try to convey the point that this is a choice, the extent to which poverty continues, the very high rates, the soaring inequality and so on, are political choices, and they are not readily compatible with the sort of human rights standards that we should all be meeting, particularly in a very rich country. So I'm really looking forward to hearing whatever you guys have to say to me today, and I hope that the initial report that I issue, which will be at the end of my visit at a press conference on the 15th of December, will be able to do justice to at least some of the concerns that you have. So many thanks for welcoming me here this morning.
Thank you, Philip. So just to give a little bit, if you could look around you, we have the RAP's posters. We have artwork. So RAP actually, what we do is we also produce the posters so that when we organize, sometimes art is best to send out the messages. And if you're interested, you can hit us up too. And also just a reminder to keep your cell phones off or silent so that we could continue, without disturbance on this forum. And also just a reminder, this forum is filmed and also we'll be taking pictures. So just to give you a heads up on that. So without further ado, let's start on the first panel. The first panel will talk about the impact of gentrification, displacement, and the effect of homelessness. And today we have three panelists, three great advocates from different parts of the community. We have Wendy Click from Hospitality House, Laura Guzman from Everyone Home, and Tommy Mecca from Housing Rights Committee of San Francisco. So let's give them a hand of applause, and we'll start with Wendy.
Well, thank you, Rob, for the opportunity to expose before the UN Special Rapporteur the devastating human and community impacts of displacement and gentrification, specifically the human cost to people impacted by homelessness in the Bay Area. My name is Laura Guzman, and I am representing Everyone Home, a collective impact initiative and organization that leads Alameda County efforts to end homelessness. And prior to my work in Alameda County, this was home. I worked for 20 years serving the basic needs of homeless people in San Francisco, and also as an advocate and organizer. I wanted to start today by briefly summarizing the ripple effects of massive gentrification and displacement, specifically for those experiencing homelessness in the Bay Area, as it's moving at a fast pace in the East Bay. I believe we are at a turning point of unprecedented and massive homelessness and suffering across our region, given the advancing of gentrification and lack of commitment from the part of elected officials, thank you, Rapporteur, for saying that, in what we know will end homelessness: eviction prevention, preservation of existing below market rental stock and our rich cultural and community support networks, appropriate land use and resources allocation for equitable development and the building of extremely low-income housing, subsidizing rents, and the political will to protect and support the self-determination of poor people before any further cuts that may come in 2018 from the federal government. In addition, as rapid rehousing homeless people in the rental market has become the norm, because we can't find any housing for our folks, our people are currently placed far away from the places they were born, grew up, and had community supports and systems, such as the Central Valley and the Low Sierras communities. And amid displacement and displacement game, rents and homelessness are also increasing across rural areas of California, compounded by Silicon Valley sprawl. In fact, some urban planner, her name is Gretchen Kaylor, has been mapping homelessness and says, if the Trump administration proposed budget cuts become reality, we will see massive homelessness as we haven't seen in the last 30 years. And as we documented well by now, one of the biggest factors behind gentrification, with the primary goal of building housing and amenities for the white and the wealthiest, as my partner says, making America white and wealthy, they make American cities white and wealthy again, is the lack of cheap and decent housing. Kaylor states that even in booming cities with some large safety net as San Francisco, which of course is dwindling as well, given the need, the lack of extremely affordable housing makes homelessness unresolvable. So these are some of my points. Housing for the rich causes homelessness. In Alameda County, the lack of affordable housing is causing homelessness. Our 2017 PID count, which revealed a 40% increase in unsheltered homelessness, much like LA and other counties in California. Basically, people revealed that median rents increased 25% since 2015, and we have lost 74% of state and federal funding housing production. In addition, we have the third largest population of extremely low income, rent burden in California behind San Francisco and LA. Affordability. The middle class gets displaced, but poor people must be swept out of sight. So it's very important when we talk about gentrification is that displacement and people being placed outside is true for the working class and people with some means. But for our elder, disabled, LGBTQ, and people of color, remaining on our streets and our cars is actually their only option. Gentrification causes disproportionate displacement and homelessness among people of color. And this is also important. We all feel that we are a paycheck away from being homeless, but the reality is that Blacks and Native Americans, with Latino Australians second and third, are much likely to be displaced or become homeless due to gentrification and lose the community safety nets we build for ourselves. And this is a continuation of the United States historical housing, racist, and economic policies, including past urban renewal, forbidding Black people from buying homes, barring immigrants from benefits and housing subsidies, and keeping people of color under lower wages despite alleged improvements. San Francisco quotes a 2% unemployment among Black folks is between 17 and 64%. And to close, gentrification fuels hatred, trauma, and lack of safety among our communities, while local government react to the concerns of the wealthy. And as the next panel will illustrate in criminalization efforts, gentrification exponentially raises the already false perceptions and notions of the house with regards to the unhoused and increases the dramatic impacts on people who are unhoused. As neighborhoods gentrify, the housed obsesses about visible homelessness, calling police at the mere sight of homeless people and asking for their own neighborhood safety. As we experience it in the Mission District, calls to the station reach to 35,000 a month when we start gentrifying with wealthy white people. And And this is due in part because of gentrification, that condo conversion in industrial areas has created this visible number of encampments that we see today. So without calling our elected officials, basically they're reacting to the House and focusing on potential removal of these encampments instead of vetting potential solutions to unsheltered people themselves or an articulate plan to address together housing crisis needs, eviction prevention, and the creation of adequate resources to address homelessness at scale. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tommy Abakoli Mecca. I've been a tenants' rights activist for the last 20 years and a queer activist since 1971. Let me tell you about the effects of gentrification on my neighborhood, the Castro, the world's most famous LGBTQ neighborhood. As rents have skyrocketed in the past 5 years, more and more long-term tenants with AIDS have been evicted, many of them becoming homeless or marginally housed. The neighborhood has one of the highest rates of Ellis and owner-move evictions in the city, according to the rent board. And as we know, eviction often equals death. The case of Iris Canada, a 100-year-old African-American woman who died shortly after she was evicted. Hundreds of new market-rate and luxury condos have been built in the Castro area and few affordable units. Affordable meaning affordable to those in the neighborhood. The number of LGBTQ people who are homeless, as recorded by the city's own count of the homeless, is 29%, which is 3 times our number in the population. Among homeless youth in this city, we represent 49%. I'll pause for a moment so you can take that in. 49%. Back when I moved here 25 years ago, we didn't see those numbers. Rents were cheaper. A young person fleeing here to escape being harassed and beaten or after having been thrown out of their homes could arrive here, get a job in the neighborhood, and move into a flat with other roommates. That's how so many young queer and trans folks and adults survived and made the neighborhood what it is, a vital, thriving community that was known during the AIDS crisis of the 80s as a model of caring. We still need this refuge. Anti-queer and transgender violence is still high, especially among trans women of color. Attacks on LGBT rights still occur throughout this country in every state and city. Young people still think of this city and the Castro as a place to go to escape that oppression. And we are losing our neighborhood to high rents, to de-gaying, as I call it. That is, the moving in of non-LGBT people because they're people with higher incomes who know nothing of the history of the neighborhood or why it's so important to preserve. The Castro has already seen the death of 2 homeless LGBT people on our streets. We have seen anti-homeless laws passed by the Board of Supervisors and the electorate that criminalize the homeless, laws that impact whether someone can actually get into housing. Because if you have fines for sit and lie and they turn into a bench warrant, it becomes a criminal record and can prevent you from getting housing that has federal funding. The solution to homelessness is not closing parks, confiscating tents, removing benches from parks or fines. The solution to homelessness is extremely simple. It's a home. And one thing that we know the homeless in this city lack is homes and the will on the part of City Hall to provide those homes. As Laura mentioned, we are building luxury condos at an alarming rate in this city, including in the Castro. Luxury condos that in many cases are going empty or are pied-à-terres for rich people who don't even live in them full times. Meanwhile, we are not building housing for the homeless or for people from 0 to 30% of AMI who need the housing the most. The solution to homelessness is a home. It's simple, but the powers that be in this city, in this country, will not accept that or implement that. And that, to me, is the biggest problem. Thank you.
Wendy Click. I work for Hospitality House at 290 Turk. I'm the program manager for the community building. Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm the program manager of the community building program, and I really take that job seriously. That's my heart, because a part of my job is to build leaders in the community. And those community members that I try to build as leaders are those who are sleeping on our streets. And those people are near and dear to my heart. Every day I worry about them. When you say displacement, sure, it's displacement physically, but emotionally, how do people feel when they're being displaced? We don't take into account of how their self-esteem is. You can't be on this block from 2 o'clock to 2:30, so can you go around the corner? Because there's certain individuals walking down the street. At 5 o'clock, you can't be on this side of the street because people are coming from work. How does that feel? That you cannot be sitting on a sidewalk because some individuals are walking down the street. Building people's self-esteem is very emotionally taxing for me, but it's also so rewarding. There are folks that are applying to be on boards. We, as Hospitality House, have 3 participant board seats. I take that into thank you, Hospitality House, because we're building leaders in the community, because we think about their self-esteem and their emotional state when they've been displaced so many times. For me, we do a hold is healing, organizing, leadership development. We could take people through trauma and listening to stories about folks being displaced on the street when they're asleep. At 1:30 in the morning, they have to move to one place. At 2:30, we have to move to another place. And maybe I get a couple of hours sleep before the police tell us that we have to come and move our tents. Yes, we do offer snacks. Yes, we offer juice. But that's not the most important thing. They keep coming back. And they're coming back because we hope that we give them hope. Because they are our leaders. And the human right is that folks are getting housing. Just like Laura and Tommy were saying, we need housing for folks that are 30% income or lower. Because if we don't, I don't even know what I could say. I would still take it personally and fight for the fight for people to have houses, because that is a human right. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is also a part where the Philip can also ask questions to the panelists. So if you have questions, you can also start doing it. So thank you.
Well, I'm is that working now?
Yeah.
There you go.
One has to turn it on, I suppose. That's the secret. One needs glasses in order to see that. So I'm here mainly to listen, but obviously a lot of what was said resonates with me very much. I like very much what is almost a slogan, that housing is not about security, it's about houses, homes. I think that's very important. I like the emphasis on the right to housing, although it has to be said that that's not going to get me very far in talking with the federal government here, which is why I'm adopting a slightly different approach, but it gets at the same sort of issues. I guess one of the things, maybe this is a classic outsider's question, but what are the gentrifiers really doing in terms of low-cost housing? Are they taking any position at all? Is there anyone from Silicon Valley? I mean, I've been looking at proposals for a universal basic income, and the great champions of that are the tech entrepreneurs. So the question is, what are they doing in their own back garden in terms of promoting low-cost housing and trying to mitigate the obviously terrible consequences of what's happening?
I can tell you what we recently learned about Facebook, and so Fremont is Alameda County city. It was particular. I mean, rent prices were never cheap. However, we're learning that one of the recent Facebook strategies is they go back and forth. So they haven't built any housing in Silicon Valley, and so their approach is San Francisco was one of the first training grounds, to bring a massive amount of 15,000 tech workers to either work or live here. So that was one of the causes of many others of the build out and also the rent increases in particular for San Francisco. But in Fremont, Union City right now, all the way to Turlock, they're basically giving $10,000 down payments for their employees so they can go and put it towards rent or toward buying houses in the East Bay. And that is another way in which they're actually starting to impact both what we call Mid-County and Alameda County, as well as the Central Valley. So the answer is nothing that hasn't been really impacting. The sprawl is one of the reasons of our rent increases, the sprawl of Silicon Valley without any housing solutions. And yes, they do, put here and there, 500,000, $1 million, which of course is not a systemic approach to really keep our folks in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, if I can add, I agree. There's a lot of talk on the part of Silicon Valley, and they're throwing some money here and there, but it's not enough. I once proposed to Ron Conway. I'm sure you all know who Ron Conway is. He was at a meeting in the mayor's office, and I was at the meeting, a whole bunch of housing people, and Ron Conway, who's the big investor in Silicon Valley, was at the meeting, and afterwards I approached him, and I said, Mr. Conway, you don't know me, but I'm a housing activist, and you expressed a desire to help, especially with the rent, preserving rent-controlled units in the city, which really are the core of our affordable housing here in the city. It's always been the greatest bulk of affordable housing has been our rent-controlled stock. And I said to him, if you're really, really sincere about wanting to preserve our stock, here's what you can do. It's very simple. Call up your buddies and raise $1 billion, contribute it to the Community Land Trust, and earmark it for the purchase of rent-controlled buildings as they come up for sale, so that the land trust can then buy those buildings, maybe 900 buildings with $1 billion, maybe more, I don't know. They buy the buildings and then they preserve them. They're taken off the land, they can't be speculated on, they can't be grabbed, they're taken off the market forever, and they're created as co-ops. The tenants get to then create co-ops. And we preserve these buildings as affordable housing forever. And to me, this is the most sane approach, is that we got to take the land off the market because capitalism is the problem. The problem is housing is a commodity. We got to stop thinking in terms of housing as a commodity and thinking of it as a human right. And as a human right means that it can't be on the market, it can't be speculated on. So I proposed this to him, and he just kind of looked at me, and Jeremy Wallenberg, his aide, was standing next to him, and he said, "Oh, Jeremy, stay in touch with this guy." And he walked away from me. But I've also mentioned this at other meetings where there were Silicon Valley people, and some of them have come up to me and said, "It's a great idea, it's brilliant," but nothing happens. So I'm just putting out there that I think one of the obvious solutions is that they have huge pockets of money, more than what the feds are going to be putting in. We know the feds are cutting money for affordable housing, and the feds aren't going to give us money to buy rent-controlled buildings. But I think this idea of us buying back our stock and preserving it forever is a good idea. It may sound idealistic and pie in the sky, but I think it's goals like this that we have to start setting for ourselves, because this is the way we're going to solve this problem in this country.
Yes, and most of the affordable housing that's coming onto the stock are not affordable for our folks. I barely can afford it, and I have a full-time job, and my partner has a full-time job. So when they say it's affordable, the both of us have a full-time job, and we can barely pay the rent and the rest of it. So to think that our folks could come and move into a place that says it's affordable housing is unrealistic, or I can't say that word, but it's just, I will use Tommy's words, it's a pie in the sky when they say it's affordable housing.
Lastly, on the affordable, I think Wendy's mentioning any efforts we've done in San Francisco and now in East Bay. We just passed a bond, and it was called the 2020, where 20% should be allocated to affordable production. At the end of the day, politicians get a bond passed, but there is no subsidies. So that's another issue that we're confronting. So even in the event that you might get certain housing units that may be dedicated, because inaffordable, it can end up being not for the extremely low income. There's no rent subsidies, and given what the federal government has done in the last 40 years, the localities are going to have to put rental subsidies, right? Without our rental subsidies and subsidizing rents, even if you build that now, the prices will not be affordable to extremely low income. So it is to be, thought in perpetuity that we need to create. Housing values are not going to go down, and I think, and that's another, perspective I think is important. I think there is a value of keeping so many people homeless, and this is a point of view of mine. I think that we're really managing homelessness because it is productive to the wealthy. So I really think that Silicon Valley does not have neither a strategy nor an interest to reduce homelessness, but that's my personal opinion.
Thank you, panelists, for that very informative. And we all know about the impacts of gentrification, but it's sometimes we still haven't really seen the full view. And it's good that the UN Rapporteur is also getting that kind of information that there is really a problem of homelessness in the United States and in San Francisco, which is one of the wealthiest cities in the USA. So we'll go to the next topic. By the way, before I do that, by the way, there are folks from different cities. There are folks from Sacramento who came all the way down. So I just want to give a shout out to them. Thank you for coming here. It takes an hour, so they may have woke up at 5 a.m. So the next panel, we'll be talking about, we have panelists that will talk about the criminalization of poverty. So instead of helping, we're criminalizing them. And we have panelists from different walks of life. Daisy Kwan and Shelby Nasino from Rehousing Berkeley. Is Tristia Bowman from National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty. Dilara Yarbrough, who is a PhD from San Francisco State University, and also Jeannie Castillo from St. Mary's Center.
I'll come up when I
Okay. So we'll start.
Hi, my name is Shelby Nasino, and I'm a third-year law student in the Policy Advocacy Clinic at UC Berkeley School of Law. Thank you, Rap, for the opportunity to speak here today. The clinic has been studying the criminalization of homelessness since 2012, and I will share key findings from 2 studies. First, we studied the enactment and enforcement of laws that target or disproportionately impact homeless people, so-called anti-homeless laws. As described in a published report and summarized in a handout today, we found that California cities have a high and growing number of anti-homeless laws compared to cities in other U.S. states. Local laws are used to cite, arrest, and jail homeless people for daytime activities like standing, sitting, or resting in public places. Cities also criminalize nighttime activities like sleeping, camping, or lodging in public places, including in vehicles. Further, local authorities deploy a wide variety of enforcement strategies to punish homeless people. Arrests of homeless people continue to rise in spite of the improved economy, and statewide arrest trends suggest that enforcement is increasingly based on people's status of being homeless, not on their behavior, raising troubling constitutional and human rights questions. Second, we studied the relationship between homelessness and business improvement districts, or BIDs. BIDs are private entities approved by local governments to collect and spend property assessments for things like street cleaning and maintenance. BIDs are prolific in many urban areas. For example, San Francisco has 15 BIDs. In a forthcoming report and summarized in another handout today, we found that BIDs seek to exclude homeless people from public space in their districts through policy advocacy and policing practices. On the policy advocacy side, BIDs use property assessment revenue to advocate for the enactment, preservation, and strengthening of local and state anti-homeless laws. The growth of these laws correlates strongly with the rise in the number of BIDs in the state since 1994. On the policing side, BIDs coordinate closely with local police departments and sometimes use their own private security to enforce municipal anti-homeless laws and otherwise remove homeless people from their districts. The rising enforcement of anti-homeless laws also correlates with the rise in the number of BIDs. Thank you.
Thanks, Shelby.
My name is Daisy Kwan, and I'm a Master of Public Policy student in the Policy Advocacy Clinic at UC Berkeley School of Law, and we are studying the impact of criminal fines and fees on people experiencing homelessness in Hayward, San Diego, and San Francisco, California. I just want to highlight 3 preliminary findings that suggest that the criminal justice system is marginalizing homeless people at every step. First, residents and businesses are driving police enforcement with complaints. We heard this from law enforcement in all jurisdictions, and this was verified in San Francisco in a 2016 budget analyst report. In San Diego, growing public concern amidst a hepatitis A outbreak in the homeless community correlated with an increase in the pressure for politicians to respond and an increase in the enforcement of sidewalk encroachment laws. Second, police and courts exercise a lot of discretion. Early evidence suggests that the inconsistency of law enforcement is itself punitive, and discretionary enforcement is disproportionately harmful for racial minorities. Police officers decide which laws to enforce without clear department policies. And in Hayward, California, officers can cite people for violations of state or local laws with fines going to either the county or the city. And this affects the fine amount imposed on the defendant and their legal rights. Judges have immense discretion when a person fails to pay or show up to court. They can issue a warrant for their arrest or dismiss the case, and many options in between. Third, the inaccessibility of courts disproportionately impacts homeless people. They face unique barriers to resolve their citations, including receiving notices, physically getting to court while protecting their belongings, and getting legal representation. When they have fines that they cannot afford, fees accumulate and debt escalates. Our work suggests that most fines and fees are not being collected and that collecting actual revenue is not the goal of enforcement. The policy goal of imposing fines and fees on homeless people is unclear, but our findings suggest that homeless people experience the process as punitive and as a barrier to exiting homelessness. Thank you.
My name is Tristia Bauman. I'm a senior attorney at the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty. My organization has been in existence for over 25 years. We're the only national legal organization whose sole mission is to prevent and end homelessness using the power of the law. What you've heard about California is typical of cities across the country. Since 2006, we have been tracking a core set of 187 cities across the United States. They're geographically diverse, they're urban and rural, big and small. And what we have found is a dramatic rise over the past 10 years, which happens to be the period post-foreclosure crisis, punishing the life-sustaining activities of homeless people. They are the types of laws that make basic human activities, like activities we're all engaged in right now, sitting down, crimes or civil punishments or civil offenses punishable by unaffordable tickets. Touching quickly on 2, there's been a dramatic rise, over 60% increase in laws prohibiting camping. Camping bans can be really broadly defined to include not only merely sleeping outside, but even occasionally using what they call the indicia of camping, meaning laying down a blanket, sleeping on a piece of cardboard, using a pillow, or even sitting with your belongings can be considered camping. And that can be punishable by lengthy periods of incarceration as well as unaffordable tickets and fines. Also, we've seen over 100% increase in laws prohibiting living in vehicles. Tents and vehicles and other forms of rudimentary shelter can be the literally only forms of shelter available to people in communities, either because there is no emergency homeless infrastructure, no emergency housing, or because that emergency housing simply cannot accommodate the needs of homeless people. For example, a lot of people are not aware that shelters will turn people away who have physical disabilities and need assistance getting in and out of bed. They will simply close their doors to those people. And we know that that has a disproportionate impact on folks with disabilities who are already disproportionately represented in the homeless community. It is true that a lot of these arrests and tickets are complaint-driven, and they're used not only to issue tickets and make arrests, but also to use threats to move people around public space. And sometimes these laws even purport to cover private space and people who are offering their private space as, for example, a safe place for people to camp can be subject to criminal penalties themselves under these laws. The process of moving people around, either in the form of a sweep of an entire encampment or individualized threats, move along, sometimes called the sidewalk shuffle, has no reductive impact on the number of people who are forced to sleep in outdoor spaces. It simply forces people into hiding, keeps them constantly moving, and wastes a lot of taxpayer dollars in the process. Speaking very briefly about some cost studies, Berkeley's Public Policy Institute looked at the economic benefit of enforcement of a Berkeley sit-lie law, found that there was no positive economic impact, but a cost associated with the implementation of that law. You have seen similar studies in Seattle University's Homeless Rights Advocacy Project, where they found that millions of dollars are wasted on enforcing just 16% of the criminalization ordinances in the city of Seattle and the city of Spokane, and that there could be $11 million savings over the cost of 5 years if that money was redirected into housing. And again, that's just evaluating 16% of the direct costs of enforcement in a single city. I will end just by saying that there has been some positive impact flowing from litigation on these issues. Having said that, litigation is limited. We know that there needs to be more to the solution to address criminalization, in part because the face of criminalization is changing. We're seeing new methods employed by cities to achieve the same goal of keeping homeless people from public spaces, fencing off public spaces, or setting up an alternative court system like they're suggesting to do in Miami Beach to circumvent what the current court system is doing to try to push back on criminalization of homelessness. So it is really important that the UN monitors continue to describe criminalization of homelessness as cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, continue to make strong recommendations and ask hard questions of our government so that we can continue to pursue constructive alternatives to criminalization.
I'm Dilara Yarrow. I'm a professor of criminal justice studies at San Francisco State University. And now that we've heard about the proliferation of anti-homeless laws throughout the United States, I'd like to turn to the ways in which these laws and their enforcement affect homeless people. So I'll present a few key findings from a survey of 351 homeless San Franciscans and in-depth interviews with 43 more conducted in collaboration with the San Francisco Coalition on Homelessness, including our two lead researchers who were themselves homeless at the time of the study, who conducted many of the interviews, and my co-author, Chris Herring. So Bilal Ali, Chris Herring, TJ Johnston are all here today as well. All right. Colleen, how does this work? I just push the arrow. I think. Technology is so difficult. All right.
Now it works.
Let's see. Yes. Wonderful. Okay, so here are some of our findings from our survey conducted over 2 weeks in December 2014. And the chart here on the screen shows the percentage of our respondents in each living situation who experienced different types of interaction with police in the last year. So from just being approached to being cited 5 or more times. Some key points. Sometimes we hear from pundits, from policymakers, that these laws do not impact homeless people in general, and that they're just used to, deal with problem behaviors in public space. This is absolutely false. Our survey shows that these laws affect the clear majority of homeless people. People living on the street and camping experience the most severe forms of enforcement, with almost all of respondents on the street and camping forced to move, and about half of people camping or in parks receiving 5 or more citations in the last year. Policing is a pervasive part of daily life for all unsheltered San Franciscans, but anti-homeless enforcement is particularly harmful to already marginalized groups. Anti-homeless enforcement makes people of color, transgender people, and people with disabilities even more vulnerable to violence and deprivation. So here, this graphic shows of our participants, 70% were forced to move in the last year by police or city officials. Because there was nowhere else to go, the majority remained in public space. Most simply moved down the block, 22% moved to a different neighborhood. And we found that even as individuals are driven from one neighborhood to another, the overall numbers of homeless people in each district, and of course in the city overall, remain consistent. So instead of a reduction, there's a constant spatial churn. This is not just a minor annoyance for homeless people. It is very harmful and very consequential. Displacement, even in the absence of citation, can have serious effects on health and on safety. So while we didn't ask participants in our study about rape or sexual assault, some women told us that they were raped after being forced to move to an unfamiliar location. 59% of transgender and gender variant participants said they felt less safe after being forced to move. And often these forced moves happen, even in the absence of citation. This type of policing is very harmful. Okay, so this graphic shows that it is not possible to police homeless people out of public space, primarily because there's nowhere else to go. So we're in a city with consistently about 1,200 people on the waiting list for shelter, right? In this context, and in all contexts throughout the United States, policing only deepens poverty and vulnerability. So the other panelists have talked about this massive citation of homeless people. We found that of our respondents who were cited, the majority, unsurprisingly, did not pay the citation. And 62% of them said that they ignored the citation and that it went to warrant for their arrest. So city data show that in 2014, 132 homeless people were jailed for quality of life violations. These 132 people didn't do anything else illegal. Their quality of life citations accumulated, they went to warrant, and they were eventually incarcerated just for being poor and being in public space. This policy changed in October of 2015 when, because of community organizing, the district attorney stopped issuing warrants for arrest based on quality of life citations. So today, a civil assessment continues to be added. We also see that people with disabilities were less likely to address citations than others. And we also saw kind of this loss of medications, assistive devices. Here you see a photo of someone's walker being crushed after homeless people's items were confiscated in a sweep. And so this type of vulnerability, destruction of belongings, priceless mementos photographs, papers that people need to get benefits, is something that continues to happen. I just briefly want to also show the cost of this, not just to the people experiencing it, but to the city. So the San Francisco Budget and Legislative Analyst Report shows that San Francisco spends at least $20.6 million, and that's a conservative estimate, a year to police homeless people's quality of life violations. So I think we're out of time. So finally, obviously, we need to block any efforts to reinstate warrants and DA prosecution because of the community organizing. The number of citations have dropped by 5,000 between 2014 and 2016, right? So the DA stopped issuing warrants, and police responded with fewer citations, and we hope that it'll decrease even more this year. So this is because of the tireless organizing of everyone in this room. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jani to talk about the work of the Homeless Bill of Rights campaign.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, or morning, yeah. I'm Janie Castillo. I work with St. Mary's Center, the Hope and Justice Coordinator, and also we are members of RAP, the Western Regional Advocacy Project. Last week in West Oakland at a homeless encampment, one of my housing homeless advocates was helping a senior on a walker get across the street to a porta potty before he has an accident on himself. An officer stopped him and said, "Go down to the corner to the light and cross there." The advocate chose not to obey the officer to help this senior get to the porta potty on time. After he crossed the street, the officer pulled up again and decided to arrest the homeless advocate for disobeying his orders and took him to Santa Rita, where he spent the night. I thought that was such an abuse of power. He showed him ID. He told him he wasn't on probation. He told him he wasn't on parole. The officer took him on a John Doe charge. So this has just happened last Thursday and Friday, and the housing advocate is here in this room today. So this is why we have an organization like RAP. This is why we band together to attempt to address the abuse of power that some of our police officers have to actually just pass judgment on our folks and do things that I believe are inhumane. In 2005, I sat at the first table when RAP was organized in 2005, and I know Teresa told you a little bit about them. It started with a small group of organizations, but we had a wide net. We came from Los Angeles, from Portland, from Berkeley, and to this day we are still fighting an incredible fight. One of the reasons that RAP works so well is that the basis of our work is what the people want, what the people need. And so we move forward on creating a bill that we have been pushing out for the last several years to help address the ordinances that my fellow panelists talked about. In 2010, RAP surveyed over 1,500 people who are living on the streets in 5 states and 12 cities. You could look at the documentation online, but way over 50% of them were cited for sleeping, sitting, and lying or hanging out. Some of them as much as 82%. 31% of those people were cited and arrested. So this problem is not just San Francisco or Berkeley, it's all across the United States. I remember in Sacramento, I think it's 2 years ago, there was a homeless advocate, chronically homeless for decades, had accumulated, and I'm not lying because there's some of these people were there, over $1 million in fees pertaining to being panhandling, pertaining to sleeping and lying, over $1 million. So one day he told the judge, the very thing that you are citing me for, panhandling, is the only way that I could pay these fees off. He, thankfully, though he passed in 2016, the efforts that the advocates have did place him in affordable housing before he passed away. So this year, in 2018, we will be crafting the Right to Rest bill again. We're going to push it through until it is law, right? Yes, we are. The bill has 3 principles. One is to protect the right to move freely, to rest, to sleep, to stand, and be protected in public spaces. The other one is to protect the right to occupy a legally parked vehicle And thirdly is to serve food and eat in public. It's a shame that we have to protect those rights and fight for those rights, but there we are. So we're planning to run the bill in California in 2018. I'm hoping that everybody is out there to make that happen. In our short history, because RAP does a lot, not just running the bill, we've been able to create tri-state multiple actions to address house keys under our House Keys Not Handcuffs campaign. We have probably coming up in January around Martin Luther King, we will have cities do one big action for affordable housing in the right to rest. We are also have a nationally recognized street outreach model that is really identifies the needs of our people and that are most impacted by these unjust policies and moves their values and their needs straight into the bill itself. We also have an incredible without housing report that is available on our website for free. I can't see that. I don't have my glasses, but I'll finish up in a minute. That has been downloaded over 40,000 times. So 40,000, let's do some more. We also have a regional media network that includes 5 major street newspapers across the cities that we are in. And that's how we get the news of our people out to everybody. And let me tell you, see the artwork around here? This artwork is woke, right? This art represents who we are and what we deserve as a community. And I hope you guys share it and look at it and do what you can with it. The other really wonderful thing that we are about to very close to get part of is to be part of the National New Poor People's Movements that's happening at the national level. So that's what RAP does. And I'll share this at the end. Anytime government tells a person your presence is unacceptable in our community, it is a human rights issue. Anytime local government demonizes one segment of society in order to control their movement and justify their removal from public places, it's a human rights issue. So I thank the UN representatives for coming to see us, and if you have any questions, I think we have a couple of minutes.
Also, there's posters at the table here if anybody wants to pick some up on the way out.
So we'll open up for questions from the UN Rapporteur Fellow.
Well, many thanks. That was a very impressive set of presentations. It's great to know that so many of the academic institutions are focusing on the problems and exposing the inefficiencies. I'm interested in the extent to which you've managed to combine both the human rights emphasis, that there are rights being violated here, with the more instrumentalist. In other words, it's actually in your interests, city, police, and others, to take a different approach. What you're doing is throwing money away. I'm wondering what sort of, I guess 2 questions. First of all, what sort of outreach possibilities do you have to, quote, mainstream community groups? In other words, do you have anything to do with any of the law enforcement groups to try to persuade them? I know it's. I understand. I saw the same thing in LA and so on. But at a certain point, one needs to try to get allies. I don't mean all of them, but to try to identify a handful of people in other places who will realize what's really going on. And become spokespersons within their settings to say, look, these guys are not all idiots or lunatics. They actually are speaking sense, and maybe we should do something. The second question is a much broader one, and that is, what can I do? In other words, what sort of analysis, what sort of recommendation would be helpful coming from the UN? and bearing in mind that I have to cover a huge array of issues, so I can't go into great detail, but obviously I want to make a difference to an issue which is clearly chronic and only getting worse.
Thank you for those questions.
Thank you for those questions. In answer to the first one, there have been efforts to try to reach out to other stakeholders in this process, law enforcement, city governments, other levels of government, to talk about the problem of criminalization and figure out how we can all work together to achieve the common goal of ending homelessness, but not using a criminalizing strategy. So there is actually a new law enforcement group, brand new, full of prosecutors, sheriffs, and others. The acronym is LEAP, L-E-A-P. I forget what the acronym stands for. I'll have to look that up. But they are newly formed to achieve this very goal, to have a strong law enforcement stance and presence in opposition to criminalization of homelessness. There's also work being done with the National League of Cities and the National Association of Counties to, at minimum, educate those levels of government about the ineffectiveness and waste and illegality of enforcement of criminalization laws. In response to the second question, the really important question about what it is that can be done, quick example, because of advocacy that was done at the international level and recommendations made from international law monitors, the federal government included in one of its most important funding sources to local governments for homeless services a question about criminalization of homelessness. That was in the HUD Notice of Funding application, which is a grant completed by local quasi-governmental bodies to secure funding for local homeless services. It is only a 2-point question. It merely represents a single funding stream, but it is something that can help incentivize cities away from criminalizing. And we have seen in some of the debates about enacting new laws a question about how that will impact local funding. So one of the recommendations that we would love to see is a recommendation for the federal government to use its other funding streams to local government to disincentivize criminalization in a direct way and to directly incentivize housing creation.
Thank you for the question. In Oakland, there's a table called the Homeless Action Working Group where we have campers and also advocates and also city administration staff actually sit together and talk about best ways to help people move when they say they have to. But we wanted to be able to, as advocates, assist folks as much as possible with that move. And on the sidelines, though, we haven't brought the police in, and Caltrans is also a really big entity. The city administrator actually has conversations with Caltrans and the police. Personally, at St. Mary's Center, what we are attempting to do is bring our unhoused folks to certain neighborhood meetings where the police are so that they could actually talk directly to the police officers. Every neighborhood in Oakland has a neighborhood meeting where we need to bring people together to have better conversations on how to treat each other. In those meetings, there's also a lot of NIMBYism, so it's not just the police. We got residents that are...
Say that.
Yeah. So I believe conversation is at least the first step. Thank you for that question.
Oh, over here.
Oh, yeah. You gotta come sit with me.
So I just wanted to add one really fascinating thing as we have kind of presented the findings of our study, the Coalition on Homelessness. We're presenting again, Chris Herring and I, tonight to the Police Commission of San Francisco, a more extended version of these findings. But one thing that initially really surprised me is that there are many police officers who see that this is ineffective and see that it's harmful. Interviewing one officer, I remember he told me, if Mrs. Smith continues to call 911 because, there's a homeless man in front of her residence, then we're duty-bound to respond. And so I think a really concrete and important thing that the UN can do is advocate for the decriminalization of homelessness, right? Get rid of these laws that make it a crime to rest, to sleep, and to simply be in public space. These violate human rights, and this type of criminalization is not just, an ineffective and wasteful response to poverty, it actually produces poverty.
Thank you, panelists. Those are really in a way we all know it, but it's a great opening. For how much is really poverty and homelessness is criminalized, and it's not just the laws read, but also the residents, the mentality, especially the people in the suburban area, or even just here in San Francisco, that there is this idea that homeless are already criminal without even putting up behavior, and it's just being discriminated just based on housing status. So we'll go into the next topic, and the next topic is about the impact of technologies in criminal system and also in welfare system. So the panelists, please come up. It's Nikki Jones from Sacramento Homeless and Organizing Committee, Kirsten Keller, former director of Compass Family Services, and Jennifer Friedenbach on Coalition on Homelessness. And again, just a reminder, we do have a timekeeper over there, so I'm pretty sure you get used to that. Yeah.
Somebody they can ignore.
Sure. Hey, my name is Nikki, and I have been a street outreach worker, in Sacramento, so about 2 hours, an hour and a half from here, in the capital, since 2014, and before that, was working just on advocacy around these issues of decriminalization, of being poor enough to not have a house. And also the idea of access to housing as a human right. We're talking about new technology, specifically the coordinated entry system that's mandated by HUD. How many folks are kind of familiar with that? I don't want to explain too much what it is if people know what it is, but I'm happy to explain more of what it is. Do you have an idea? Okay, so the HUD releases money to jurisdictions throughout the country to engage in different types of programming, mostly voucher-based or assistance programming. And to access any of those programs, nowadays, beginning in 2015, they required implementation of what's called a coordinated entry system. And that can look like a lot of things in a lot of different communities, but basically what it looks like in my community is one survey administered by a very small group of people to all of the people experiencing homelessness in our community, or an attempt to access all of those people through this small group of people. And that brings up kind of a lot of problems. So, I joined the service provider community with a lens of human rights and kind of a critique of wealth inequality and the speculative markets and the oppressive systems of capital that necessitate homelessness. And so when my community began to implement the coordinated entry system, imagine all of our suspicion when we thought, we're going to be spending millions of dollars on this technology that literally is a fancy and electronic funnel to housing that doesn't exist, right? We know our housing stock doesn't exist. We know that there's not housing for the market-based vouchers. We know that there's not project-based housing, and we know that there's not rent-controlled housing, which, particularly in my city. And so we knew that this kind of implementation was going to not really meet the needs of people, but rather meet the needs of our government to collect mass data. So what the system does on a local level, it connects your data federally. So Homeless Management Information Systems is the technology that most coordinated entry systems connect with. You're not required necessarily to use HMIS, but it's the recommended one. It's the one that HUD works with most effectively. And so using this system, 2 minutes, thank you. So using this system and using this tool is really difficult. It takes away the traditional wait list, takes away folks' access to the information, to safety plan and survival plan for their own lives. So once you're put into this system, you're categorically defined, you're pathologized either with a disability or without, you're prioritized for housing only if you have one, so it's best to say you have one. They're asking service providers to give disability, titles without even meeting people's needs around their disability or having conversations about what that looks like, actually asking people to go against their licensing to be able to do this. The point of this idea of this mass data collection, very detailed information, medical history, social security number, name, and the very troubling part is ongoing location data. So they want to know every time an outreach worker contacts every person, anywhere, anytime. So every place that you've spent the night for the last 3 years, they want to know that kind of information, and they want to have that collected for every homeless person across the United States. And so in a Trump-Carson era, that kind of mass data collection is very suspect. It doesn't, the mistrust of the government from people experiencing homelessness is so wide already. The disenfranchisement of this coordinated entry system from their ability to take care of their own well-being, you're not able to see the system. You're not able to see where you're at on the wait list. You don't have any access to your own survival planning, and neither do your service providers, right? It's the continuum of care that gets that. Your service provider doesn't get that. You don't get that as an individual attempting to access care. And that lack of transparency, along with the ask for all your information that they share, including with the police, they share that information. It says it right on the consent form. It's too big of an ask for folks for a program that actually says in the consent form, it guarantees that you may never be called for a housing program. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. My name is Kristen Keller. I actually had a PowerPoint presentation, but Colleen, actually, if you can just skip to the 6th slide on that presentation, I think I can summarize everything up to that point. So my name is Kristen Keller. I'm a former program director at Compass Connecting Point, which is a program here in San Francisco that actually is now an access point that conducts, is part of the intake process for the coordinated entry system in San Francisco. So it was a big part of the implementation process over the past year, and can talk a bit about what this looks like here in San Francisco. So we already heard a little bit about what the coordinated entry system is. The idea is that this is an innovative new system that utilizes a coordinated assessment tool, links families and individuals to ideally the most appropriate shelter and housing program that will meet their particular needs as found through the assessment process, and then streamlines the placement of individuals and families into those programs. I will say in San Francisco there have been some benefits to the implementation of the process. The Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing has, in fact, coordinated many private and public family shelters, rapid rehousing programs, and transitional housing programs, meaning that families who used to have to complete many applications to get into the various different programs do now only complete one. However, that really consists of one initial intake where families complete 2 quick assessment tools, one to assess shelter needs and one to assess housing needs. And then families who score the highest, ideally, as, let's say, highest vulnerability, are then matched to the programs available for those highest vulnerability families. So while we have seen good coordination of this intake process to some degree, there are some pretty big challenges. One initial one is just that several key shelter and housing components are not a part of the system yet. That includes the domestic violence shelters in San Francisco, as well as our eviction prevention programs. The second issue is really that the validity of coordinated assessment is uncertain. Families often misreport their situations at the time of intake due to their state of crisis and or fear of child protective services and general mistrust of social service providers, and they may not reveal very important details about their safety and stability concerns at the time of intake, so they may end up appearing as they are less vulnerable than they genuinely are and are then matched with an inappropriate intervention. So the biggest issue is that coordinated entry really, all it is a system of coordinating access to pre-existing programs and nothing more. So while the system greatly reduces barriers to accessing waitlists for shelter and housing programs, the real need, the genuine need around housing stock and added capacity in both shelter programs and housing programs is completely unaddressed. Existing program capacity in San Francisco for families has been so inadequate to meet the need that for several years, the estimated wait for a family for placement into a 6-month shelter stay was 6 months to a year, if that family was able to remain on that list for the duration of that time. So housing opportunities then, of course, are fewer and further in between. So coming to this slide here in terms of accessing housing interventions, ideally how this assessment process works in theory is that low vulnerability families are seen as probably able to get housed on their own. Families who have then moderate vulnerabilities ideally would be connected to programs like rapid rehousing. What these look like in San Francisco, these are typically 1-year rental vouchers that are issued to families, and then the families themselves have to go out and find the housing. They have to find a unit they can afford, and oftentimes this means pretty massive displacement to other cities and counties where they can find rents low enough where the voucher can apply. Over the course of that 1 year, then, the family is expected to increase their income to the degree that they can continue to maintain that lease. And then ideally, right, these really high vulnerability families, those are families who have significant barriers to full-time employment and then market rate rents, such as chronic health issues, mental health issues, disabilities, and so on, would be connected to more supportive programs, transitional housing or permanent supportive housing, where they would be able to live permanently and pay only 30% of their income to rent. The issue in some is basically that there really is little to no transitional housing or permanent supportive housing available. So what that means is that you can basically X out that transitional housing and permanent supportive housing block, and all of the highest vulnerability families will now be placed first into rapid rehousing programs. They will then be offered these 1-year rental voucher programs that will displace them from the much-needed services they're probably already connected to here: health services, disability-related services, social services, mental health services, relocate somewhere else for up to a year where they are not going to be very likely necessarily to increase their income enough to maintain that lease. And as the former program director of this program Connecting Point, we saw a very high return of high vulnerability homeless families who were not able to increase their income, who were further destabilized by relocating to another city or county, floundered for 6 months, maybe received an eviction, and came right back into our homeless service system. So there's a big question as to whether rapid rehousing is not only a suitable intervention for the highest vulnerability families, but whether it will actually destabilize them even further from the state of homelessness they were already in. And I just want to point out, in my last slide, just for the Rapporteur, there's a kind of egregious typo. But while coordinated entry systems may have the capability to transform homeless service systems, they cannot function as intended when the very housing resources they seek to coordinate are just simply not available. So that should be not available. Yes, it's a pretty big issue. And I know that this does not just apply to the San Francisco Bay Area, but it's a big issue in most urban areas throughout the country right now.
All right, Jennifer Friedenbach from Coalition on Homelessness. I have an announcement to make that's going to be kind of shocking. It's going to be contrary to everything you've been reading in the papers. Computers and technology cannot solve homelessness. So that's the way coordinated entry has been talked about in San Francisco, and you can look it up in the Chronicle, and it actually says that that it's gonna end homelessness. Our new computer system. So they don't. They also, oftentimes don't make things more efficient either. And so I just kind of want to throw that out there. Typically, what computers with regards to poverty and homelessness, I would say, are more in this kind of direction. One, they shrink down the actual need to create a false political win, right? And that is very, very deliberate. They prioritize scarce resources without the nuances that only human beings can decipher. They also are used to disqualify people for services. I mean, that's their basic function, besides fueling data for the bureaucracy, right? And they're also used to prosecute people for fraud, or other criminal situations for simply trying to survive. So, and I know we're focused a lot on coordinated entry, but here in San Francisco, coordinated entry basically, we want to put everyone who's homeless through this assessment. For San Francisco, just in 1 year, it's 21,000 people. Okay? So imagine the time and effort that takes. And for the homeless person who's going through that very skinny door to get assessed, they're really not going to get anything out of it. Maybe a few hundred will get housed every few years, but we've got thousands and thousands of people in need of the housing. We've got over 1,000 people on the single adult wait list. But oftentimes the assessment actually creates an additional barrier to the emergency services or long-term housing that they're trying to get. So I want to give some examples of those previous 4 points. So one of them is around the kind of these false political wins. Homeless people here and across the country, they kind of use as political fodder for political gain, as are, other populations who are vilified and scapegoated. And, and then they're also used, as, so then you have this situation where people are trying to claim victory over addressing homelessness. In San Francisco, with the onslaught of coordinated entry for families, we shrunk down our homeless definition that was very hard fought for, that included families who were basically considered homeless before, are now no longer considered homeless and don't qualify for any of those services. And so, not to be overly cynical, but, that means when they do the comparisons, they'll be able to say, look, we reduced family homelessness by this much. And there's a lot on that because, we talked about technology before. There was a big investment. This mayor in San Francisco is really into getting the investments from technology and the big corporations for these one-time gifts. And so there's all this political pressure to show that they were able to reduce family homelessness because there was this big investment from the Benioffs. And so they'll be able to do that because they created this computer system. So that's that's one example. And they're spending, I think it's going to end up being about $6 million on it. So nuance. So this idea of the computer eliminating nuance. So again, going back to the family system, which is the one that we're talking about because that's the one that's been implemented, we had at least 2 cases of homeless family members who were denied life-saving medical treatment because they did not have stable shelter and were unable to prioritize those families and get them into shelter. They had to wait the 111 days. And at that point, their cancer and, these different situations were much farther along than they should have been, and their life expectancy and ability, is greatly shortened. Another example is you don't have those relationships because you're creating these assessments to have the honesty to, have those deep conversations about what's really going on. We recently had a report yesterday of a young woman who was trying to get shelter recently. She was in a very violent situation that she was staying with, and she went to get help for shelter. She was told she could only qualify if she slept on the streets. Did not have there was no nuance in the system to be able to build her up or the relationship with the person to get deep into it. She was killed, and she is now dead. And, and this is a very young adult who lost her life. And so those nuances aren't captured either. So I know I'm out of time. I thought I was going to go under time. Really quickly, we also use it for the welfare fraud stuff. San Francisco started doing biometric imaging in order to bust people for welfare fraud because we reduced our grants to people who were homeless, and they wanted to show if you showed up for a shelter that we could bust you for fraud because you were getting your full grant. Instead of just $70, you were getting $300. And so they spent millions of dollars for biometric imaging. Now in San Francisco, in order to get into shelter, you get a full face and finger biometric image, and that's been going on for years. But thank you.
I know.
Yeah, I wish we have the whole day. If the UN could be here the whole day, the whole week, because there's so much information really, and yes, we do have a time, 5 minutes, but it's these kind of reportings or happenings or situation takes more than 5 minutes. So we'll open to you, Philip, if you have any questions to the panelists.
First of all, just to say that while I'm only here for 5 minutes, as it seems, in fact, we've done a lot of work. My colleagues and I, who are here with me, have been working for months, reviewing literature and talking to people, hundreds of people spoken to and so on. So we've got a pretty good background. Something like the CES we know very well. I've been through the whole questionnaire and so on. I'm only grateful that I don't have to answer the many questions that are there. One specific question, in LA, it was clear that the police were very keen to get access to the CES system, but the homeless authority, LASA, has adopted a policy of not providing access. And I think that's a very important issue. I mean, there are still concerns because, of course, the policy now can be different in 3 years' time. But I'd be interested if the San Francisco Police Department has a specific, clearly has access, and if there is no policy on the part of the housing authorities. A number of you have come back to the same issue, which is that it's all about funding. In other words, no matter how sophisticated your technology or your systems, if there's no extra money being generated, Is there any movement to have a Measure H equivalent in San Francisco that they had in LA, in other words, to try to put a popular measure which would actually devote more money to homelessness? So what they saw in LA, I'm not saying that it's been a magic bullet by any means, but the amount of resources that are suddenly available to address or to build new units has increased dramatically simply because voters were convinced that it was in their interests to devote a greater proportion of city and county funding to homelessness.
So the first one is that the first question is the police in San Francisco do not have access, but they do have a very close relationship. For the past 7 months, they've been meeting with the homeless department every morning at 8 a.m. at the Mission Police Station and lining out where homeless people are camped and have a very intimate relationship in the response to homelessness. And I would say it's a primary response to homelessness is a police response. The second piece in terms of measures, we attempted that last November and lost. We had, it was similar as a sales tax, but it was, unlike Los Angeles, our policymakers here, it was we tried to get a more progressive revenue, and then the mayor's office moved it over to a sales tax, and then there was a very lackluster involvement in that campaign. We're going to try again from a people's initiative, and we want to do it differently and kind of take it outside of the policymakers' control. And we're at this moment in time where we can pass an initiative and have it be a special tax that says this goes directly to homeless people. We would only need 50% of voters because there was recently a court overturned. Typically in California, you need 2/3 of voters to pass it, which is why we were unsuccessful. Part of the reason we were unsuccessful with a couple of different measures last time. So the idea we're going to have this massive Trump tax break and try to capture that money in the corporations in San Francisco and then use that to end homelessness. And so we're certainly gonna, right? Certainly want to try it and see how we do.
Well, I mean that's a wonderful piece of news in a sense, because one of the striking things about my visit, of course, is that I started the visit in DC on the day that the Senate approved their version of the tax reform, and by the end of my visit we will see an increasing number of statements by Speaker Ryan, President Trump and various others that there needs to be radical welfare reform. And so the big challenge, in a sense, is not to just stay back with the policies of the past, but to be keeping up with the new realities which are going to make things dramatically different.
Yeah, we have a big, hard fight.
Okay, thank you, panelists. Wow. We'll go to the next topic, which is intersectionality. Homelessness is, it encompasses different issues, and it is caused by different, especially by poverty, of course. But there are, so the panel will talk about the intersectionality of all these things that connects to homelessness. And we have Colin Rebecca of St. Anthony Foundation, Paul Bowden of Western Regional Advocacy Project, and Joe Wilson of Hospitality House.
Alrighty. So, time lady. Okay.
So you're the one we ignored?
So I want to start out my remarks by just talking a little bit about St. Anthony's, because I think it helps to frame what it is that I'm going to say. So here at St. Anthony's, we're probably most well known for our free meal program, our dining room. And when you leave today, you'll see a long line at the building across the street. On average, we serve about 2,400 meals a day. And we've been doing this since 1950. And actually, before 1950, when we had a formal dining room program, we had the friars who lived in the friary across the street from us had been serving meals out of their back door, basically, since the 1906 earthquake. At the time that our organization was founded, it was actually a friar who, Father Alfred, who had said, we're giving people a sandwich and they're taking it and they're eating it sitting on the sidewalk. And this was in the 40s, before we started. People, feeding people is important, but the way in which charity is provided is also important, in that we need to be able to be providing services in a way that upholds people's inherent dignity. And this challenge persists in our service today, seeing people who are poor as people with inherent worth and dignity. Over 67 years of providing service or providing charity, I think that we as a society have seen different excuses for why this type of charity is needed. It's because people are drunks. It's because people are on drugs. It's because people are lazy. It's because people are bums. What I think that our 67-year legacy of charity really shows is that there is a systematic problem with poverty in our city and in our country that's built in to the way our economic system works, the way our system of government works, the way we teach our children, the way that the media works in terms of giving us messages about who's poor and why. And we have realized that it's important to respond to people's basic needs and at the same time to challenge our community to talk about why poverty exists and to promote justice. So we know that charity doesn't end poverty, and a charitable response to poverty is the first step that can lead us to respecting the dignity of others. Our local, state, and national welfare systems are underfunded, and they're really not designed to bring people out of poverty. They're designed to encourage work. They're designed to encourage marriage. They're designed to last a very short amount of time and only supplement what's actually needed for people to survive. And so we're coming at a place where we're looking at poverty, our government's looking at poverty from this framework, is that our assistance programs are not really meant to lift people out of poverty. They're meant to, maybe placate the poor. They're meant to sort of give people just enough to survive, just above, just above what they might need for where they might be angry enough to go out into the streets and, demand their rights. And then at the same time, our government political systems, I don't think has ever taken a stance that our anti-poverty or our welfare programs should actually end poverty, but that they should promote work or promote other types of behavior. And this hasn't been a winning strategy, but I think that there are issues related to racism, classism, sexism, and all the other sort of problems in our society that have fueled the reason why poverty exists. And we know that as a charity we can't end poverty by providing meals every day, but we can lessen suffering by doing so. And if we can work together as a community to respond to poverty through a lens of dignity and respect, then we hope that can be a place that we think that has to be the place where we start. And I know that Paul and Joe are going to talk more about how some of these issues intersect, but we feel at the heart of those is dignity and respect of each and every person.
Okay, just a short moment, I have to replace the
battery. And now I'm turning it over.